We are live on YouTube. This is the Complete Man podcast, episode number 18, and we're live in 3, 2. All right, welcome back to the Complete Man podcast with your host, Purdeep Sangha, the Complete Man himself. Purdeep, how you doing today, man?
Hey, Nathan, I'm doing awesome, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. It's good to be back on the microphone, good to be back recording some episodes, and just interested in what you got planned for the listeners and for myself today.
Yeah, you're like the old school bands like Rolling Stones and stuff that, just go back on tour, right? It's been a hiatus for a little bit, and now you're back.
Well, you said you went to California. You kind of took maybe a work vacation, and I didn't even know that you were in I didn't even know that you were in the States.
Yeah, it was the first time that I've been back there. I went twice actually in 2 weeks. 2 trips down to California. One for kind of myself / work, and then the other one was pretty much work. And so it was great. I haven't been to the States in I think it was almost 3 years.
Wow.
The last time I went. Definitely not during COVID. And so it was good to be back there. So the next one we'll probably take a family trip down. I went down to San Diego on the second round, and that's my favorite place in the U.S. It's an amazing city. Really nice West Coast vibe. So it's amazing. If I was to move to the States, it'd be in San Diego.
Yeah, I grew up in California, and 99% of California I would never go back to, but San Diego is so beautiful and it's got that balance. But yeah, it's an amazing place for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what do we got on the agenda for today's episode?
So today we are going to be talking about information and data and accuracy of data, because we also did an episode a while back, which you brought to my attention, that we were talking about, okay, be careful where you get your information from. But we're going to take this one step further. We're going to be talking about how important it is to actually get the right information and right data all the time. And we're not just talking about news. We're talking about how we operate as human beings, our brain, because our brain is consuming so much information, so many bits of information every single second. And we have to ensure that that information, whatever is being gathered, that it's accurate, because as much as people think that our brain is very accurate, it's actually not. Mm-hmm. It's actually a very rough system. In fact, scientists have shown, like, if we think about it, we have so many trillions of cells in our body, trillions. And the chances of every one of those interactions, biological interactions or electrical interactions between cells and throughout our body being exactly perfect are like very, very slim. So it's not like computers, where computers are very accurate. They're built to be accurate. Our bodies are not necessarily built to be 100% accurate. So sometimes we get information, sometimes cells misfire, and sometimes cells don't fire at all when they should be. So we need to understand that we as human beings are flawed, and that we don't always get the right information, right data, although we think we do. And that's why it's important to be able to be conscious and aware of that, so that we can act appropriately and we have the right strategy. So data and information, we just need to be aware. And this is important because a lot of people are walking around on autopilot. A lot of people are not aware. It's interesting because when I see my kids, I'm always teaching them to be aware and alert. Mm-hmm. And not from the perspective of like, someone's going to kidnap you. It's be aware of your environment, be conscious of your environment, not only from a accuracy perspective, but also from an enjoyment perspective. Because those who are not accurate or aware or conscious of their environment, they're not necessarily enjoying life as much. Actually, I believe, we haven't done any studies on this, I believe that there's a direct link between people who are depressed, that stem with or have anxiety, that deal with other possible mental health challenges, are the same individuals who are mainly on autopilot or stuck in their thinking, not fully experiencing life and the information and the data that's actually around them. So I know I've been talking here for a while about that, but I think this is very important, because many of us are walking around doing the same old thing every single day, and we're missing out on some very critical information that can not only dramatically improve our businesses, but our personal lives as well.
Okay, so before we jump into that, two things come to mind. Number one, also just being aware of what's going on in your own head. What is triggering those programs that you default back to? I think even those of us that are aware of how much of our routine is based off of programs, we still fall victim to it. I mean, it's hard to be in the moment, consciously examining every single decision, every single breath. I mean, there's a reason we off put a bunch of this to the subconscious. And then the thing that I think about is the subconscious itself, how things slip in, how things that you catch out of the corner of your eye that you don't even realize, or things that are said, or things that are happen, and you take in and you add a meaning to them without even realizing that you're doing it, and that becomes part of your subconscious programming. So a lot of this living on autopilot, this being kind of a victim of unexamined thinking patterns. Even those of us who are fully aware of it, I make my money, I make my life off of utilizing this knowledge, and I still fall victim to it all the time.
Yeah, really good point there. And here's what I believe it comes down to is if we take a look at how our brain works, now we're taking a look at the science. And the estimate is roughly about 11 million bits of information that our brain consumes every second. That's a lot of information. And the estimation is that we can only consciously process roughly about 270 to 500 bits. That is a fraction of the information that we're actually taking in. So we're consuming this massive amount of information, which our brain is actually saying what's relevant, what's not, and then projecting the relevant information and data based on two particular things. A, what's going to keep us safe, but B, what is our goal? And so that's why people that don't have goals have a very difficult time actually processing information because their mind is just off into no man's land. And so when you said that voice in our head, and a lot of times that voice, majority of times, is incorrect because that voice in our head is not in the present moment. That voice in the head is actually taking a look at information from the past. Here's the interesting thing about the brain. Every time we bring up information from the past, it's information from the past plus the present. So we're actually making it more inaccurate than it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
So we're replaying it. And every time we replay the same scenario, we actually modify it. So that's why we talk about people's testimonies during criminal cases and stuff like that. It's not 100% reliable. In fact, it's very unreliable.
Mm-hmm.
And so people will make stuff up. But every time we bring up a memory, we're actually recording over that. It's like an old VHS, right? Where you could record over and over and over. And eventually the quality just goes to crap.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing with our brain. Just obviously it functions completely differently, but the concept is very similar. Then the other problem is that we're trying to predict things in the future without having the right information. So we're coming up with own relevant, like all this stuff that hasn't even happened that we're predicting off of incorrect information. So we're coming up with all these scenarios. What if this or what if that? That's when we start to have anxiety. That's when we start to worry, right? That's when we start to our heart starts to race. Or I haven't gotten this done. It's like okay, so the brain just goes on information that isn't relevant to right now, which is the most important moment of your life.
Mm-hmm.
If you can focus on right now and the information that you have right now, you can actually be able to make better decisions. And that's ultimately what it is. Life is about two things. It is making decisions and taking action. And we've talked about that in a way back episode. But if you can get better at making decisions and taking action, you're going to be way further ahead than everybody else. And that information that you get to make the decision is the most important. I actually wrote this out. My wife and I were having a conversation from a decision making standpoint. You know, why do people make ineffective decisions? And I actually made out a chart and I said, I can actually use this. I didn't even think about this. Like we have a decision matrix, but we had a couple other components that we added. I'm like, the first thing is you have to be fully in the present moment and aware and alert. Because if you are in the present, you can actually get the right information. From the right information, you can actually come up with you can say the right options, right? By being in the present moment, you can actually come up with the right options and then weigh out those options effectively. What ends up happening is a lot of people don't have the right information, therefore they don't create the right options or choices in life, or maybe not enough because they just don't have enough information, or that information is flawed. And that's why it's important when we talk about information that it's accurate, that it's timely, and that it's complete,
Mm.
and that it's for this particular situation. So if we talk about accurate, okay, where are we getting the source of information from? Are we double checking? Are we verifying? Is it timely, meaning that is it within this particular period of time? You don't want to take information from 10 years ago and apply it today. That's just going to be irrelevant, right? Is it complete, right? Is it actually complete enough for you to actually make a decision? And that's very important. And then there's, when we take, and the situational is the other one, which means that we have to understand that information that we have, is it relevant to the situation we are in right now?
Mm.
Sometimes that information is based on a different situation, right? And that's why when people talk to each other and they say, "Oh, I was in that situation, you should do this," you should always double S and say, it's not exactly the same situation. As, so then you can come up with the options, and then from the options you can weigh them out, and then you can act on them, and then you'll realize whether it was a good choice or not. And there's a series of steps after that, but that's essentially it. If you can get better at that decision tree matrix in terms of getting information, making decisions, or weighing out the option, all these different factors, you're going to be like, wow, it's like a systemized approach.
Mm.
And some people think that that's being roboticized. No. Guess what a robot is? A robot does the same thing over and over again on
Mm.
autopilot.
Yeah. So here's, in my personal life, something that I run into is sometimes I'm not able to see certain things. Sometimes things don't click until a week, maybe 2 weeks later. And even though the information was right there staring me in my face, either an emotional blockage or a preconceived notion or something else was going on that prevented me from being able to accurately do this. And I will say that very often in life, it's probably not the majority, but very often in life where I have like those pie in the face moments, I look back a few times, maybe even obsessively over the next couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden I'm able to see things that I wasn't able to. I'm able to access information and put things together and be like, oh, how come I couldn't figure that out in the moment? How come it took me 2 weeks after the opportunity was lost to finally see things clearly? And do I even see things clearly now? So I guess the question for you is, how do we get better at, in the moment, being able to utilize these things rather than being able to clearly see it with hindsight? They say hindsight is 20/20. How do you have clear vision in the moment?
The first thing is to realize that it will never be 100% accurate, and
Mm.
you'll never have 100% of the information that you need to have. So give yourself a little bit of slack, right? Be compassionate with yourself. That's the first aspect. The second is we have to learn how to reflect throughout the day.
Mm.
We have to learn how to take a break throughout the day. And that could be a meditation session, that could be walking, whatever it is. Because here's how we work. We have our emotions that add on to our thoughts. And a lot of the times the emotions aren't really relevant or not really accurate either, right? They're based on something that might have happened yesterday and you're carrying that emotion today. You had a fight with your spouse yesterday and today you're still carrying that on, because it's viscerally, it's in your body. That's why they call it somatic, right? And that's why a lot of people, when they go and they have traumatic um, things in life happen, nothing physical, they actually hold that tension within their body. And that's why massage and other treatments can actually release that. So emotions have an impact on your accuracy in this moment.
Mm.
And when you are able to reground your emotions and actually maybe even be somewhat neutral in your emotional state, then you'll be able to deal with the information more accurately. For example, you're never going to have the right information in a state of anger or in a state of sadness or in a state of anxiety. That's just shuts your brain down from all options, right? You're basically in survival mode.
Mhm.
And even being overly optimistic, sometimes you just miss information. Whether it's hey, you got this huge deal or potential client and they're all on board and you might have missed something. and then all of a sudden the deal falls through the cracks,
Mhm.
right? Because you're way too hyped up. So being able to be neutral is very important. And some people might say, hey, Purdeep, what do you mean? You're always about optimism and positivity. I'm not talking about don't be positive or optimistic. I'm just saying don't be overly positive and optimistic if the situation doesn't call for it. You have to be more accurate. So that's why you should never be in that negative space and believe that you have the right information. You should at least be neutral, and from neutral, if you're to the positive perspective, you will that's kind of the zone where you get the most accurate information. And then if you're overly optimistic and positive on the complete opposite side of the scale, you could miss a few things as well.
Mm.
So that is essentially your state that you are in, your mental state, your emotional state, and your energy levels. If we talk about that as well, is your energy. If you're low energy, you're not going to catch all that information that you need. That's why things like sleep and diet, nutrition, exercise are so important. There's a direct correlation, right? And for entrepreneurs, especially, if you want to be better at making decisions and making money, go exercise, get your sleep, eat properly, be healthy, because you're going to have a higher energy level, and that's going to directly impact the information that you're able to receive from the environment and actually make more effective decisions. And it frustrates me sometimes when I see people not do that, right? You don't have to have a six pack and abs and run a marathon. You just need to be healthy enough to have the right energy levels. If you're feeling low on energy, you're not taking in the right information.
Mm.
If you are high in energy, you're going to be a lot more alert to be able to bring in that energy, but also bring in that information, but also process that information more accurately. And here's an example that I can use. There were times when I had challenges with my wife that were fairly significant. And in the evenings, I would be so drained. And I share this in my book that my brain was just like, it was just a bunch of sludge. And I was making decisions that I shouldn't have been making in that state because the information that I had and the way I was processing it wasn't accurate. And it's because I was having challenges in our relationship. So I made some really dumb mistakes, not because I'm not intelligent, not because I didn't know what I was doing, not because I didn't know the industry. I was just not in the right state
Mhm.
to get the right information and make the right decisions. So being in the right state is the most important thing that you can do to make better decisions and take more action.
Okay. So all of this is hitting home with me. One last thing that I want to get your take on is there's a guy on YouTube and I watch his videos sometimes, and he was talking about he had come home and was craving McDonald's, and he had no idea. He's like, I don't eat McDonald's. I think it's disgusting. And for some reason, I've just been craving it all night. And he said that he told his wife, he's like, or his girlfriend, he's like, I don't know why, but I am so hungry for some McDonald's right now. And she goes, oh, I ate McDonald's earlier, and you might have seen the wrapper halfway sticking out of the trash or something, or maybe you smelled the McDonald's when you came in the house. So a piece of information that he didn't even realize that
Mm.
he had absorbed was influencing his thought process. And I think when we watch the news and there's the ticker that's going on at the bottom, there's the attractive person talking, there's the trained tone of voice and rhythms that they talk in, there's the horrific story that they're talking about while they're also smiling, and your brain's just being bombarded with all of this information. And just like that McDonald's wrapper or that hint of the McDonald's smell seeps in, and you don't even realize that you're operating on information that you don't even realize is there.
Yeah, that's a really good point because we are bombarded by information and a lot of misinformation and even disinformation. So we have to filter that, and we have to consciously filter that. You got to put your phone down, not watch the news, for example, especially the replays. If you're going to watch it live because in unfiltered. Um, so those are important things. I literally, the information that I take in, I'm very, very picky about that. Extremely picky. And that's why I can have better conversations. I can have better decision making myself because I just don't take in that garbage. And so it's important. Like a lot of people, I just don't, and it's not their fault. right? We've been trained to do this. We've been trained to consume social media and sit on our phones and watch the news and all this kind of stuff. It's, how do I put it? It's just simple. Simply garbage in is garbage out. So actually, that's when I think about this, that is probably even more important than anything else in terms of making decisions and having accurate information, which is what is the information that you're consuming consciously and unconsciously, and be very diligent in having the right filters.
Mm-hmm. I like to think of that as I like to think of that as conscious content consumption. Be careful, not just about your diet of food that you eat, but your diet of information that you're intaking as well.
Yeah, completely agree.
Okay, so I know that you do a bunch of stuff. You do this podcast. You also do some other podcasts as well. I saw that you were doing a podcast with your brother recently. So if people enjoy this content and they find value in it, they'll probably find value in other content that you're doing. Real quick before we're out of here, do you have any other projects that you want to shout out, that you want to point the listeners to? If they enjoyed this content and they enjoyed the information they got here, what else might they enjoy from you?
Sure. There's two other podcasts. One is called the Business Brothers Podcast. And you can go to businessbrotherspodcast.com. And that's really around family business. And we talk a lot about different business issues. So it's not just for family business owners. I believe that majority of business owners, it is a family business because they're doing it for their family. So I would tune into that podcast. And I have the Mindshot podcast, which is mindshotpodcast.com. And that is a more regular podcast that I do every few days. It's about 5 or 6 minutes just to give you some thought, actionable items every time you listen to the episode that you can implement right away. Nothing major, just something you can do, one thing you can do throughout the day that actually has a massive or dramatic impact on your performance.
Nice. And where can people find that one at?
And that's mindshotpodcast.com.
All right. Awesome. And of course, this one, the Complete Man, where can people find this podcast at?
Check out youtubeformen.com or, well, I was going to say The Complete Man. It's not actually The Complete Man Podcast .com. It's completemanpodcast.com.
All right, man. Until next time, we will catch you later.
Can't wait.